All right, we usually have that delay, but I don't know. We'll do three, two, one, and we'll let the show begin. Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Monica here with another awesome Q&A session alongside only Sahar. I hope you're having a good year. I hope this year's been treating you very well. In less than 30 minutes, we'll be able to answer your commonly asked questions or the questions you've sent over to us by Howard, Isaac, and Josh. So thanks for being here. If you're live with us right now on Facebook, please help us spread the word. We're live, as I said. We'll make sure to answer all the questions and use that comment section below. Tell us where you're joining from and how are you doing? Because we'll keep track of that comment section and we'll talk. So Sahar, I haven't seen you in such a long time. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I know I feel the same way about all of you guys. I miss seeing all of you guys so much. And Dr. Cohen, thank you for being here with us. The last time I saw you was when you graduated. So it's really nice to see you.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited to kind of come back and spread some of the knowledge I've gained at UCSF with the UCSD community. Yeah.
Thank you for being here, honestly. Sahar, do you want us, are we getting started? Are we introducing ourselves? I really hope to hear from my twin Howard, who left us behind, and my classmate Josh, as well as Dr. Cohen, for sure. So let us know a little bit about yourself. And yeah, Sahar, take it away.
No, I'm agreeing with you, Monica. Let's get started with the introductions and then we'll get going with the questions.
We can start with Howard, since he left us in the class of 2022 behind like that. I think let's start with you.
Thanks, Monica. I think we get that. Hello, everyone. My name's Howard. I am a PharmD PhD student, and I was in the class of 2022 with Monica, but now I'm currently in my first year of the PhD program. I'm in Dr. Anthony Molina's lab in the School of Medicine. Yeah, and I'm happy to be here.
And my name is Josh, and I am currently a P3 at UCSD. I was originally the class of 2017, so I had left P2 year back in 2015 now. So it's been a couple of years since I've been out of the pharmacy program, but I'm just glad to be back and to be part of the school again. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Will's first question is, why did you choose PharmD PhD program as well as fellowship for you, Dr. Cohen? So we can start with you if you like.
Yeah, I guess I'll give my intro. I'm from the class of 2019, PharmD, no PhD, and I'll give you some perspectives on why. So I'm a second-year fellow at UCSF in clinical pharmacology. And I'm actually leaving UCSF next month to work at Denali Therapeutics as a clinical pharmacologist. And so I guess the question was why I chose fellowship. Was that it?
Correct.
And so, yeah, I chose fellowship mainly because I realized I liked research more than clinical practice. I like the longitudinal projects, really getting to answer questions and not just move on to the next patient. Which for me was important kind of for my my interests. And so I'm in 100% academic fellowship, which is basically a mini PhD without the didactics. So you just go right into working in a lab. It's much more direct and targeted to like the skills that I'm gonna need to go into industry. What you'll learn today and what I'll tell you today is if you wanna become a professor at a pharmacy school, you're gonna have to do a fellowship anyways after the PhD, 99% of the time, unless you're working on CRISPR or something like that that just takes off. And so I realized the fellowship pathway was just more direct to my career goals. So that's why I ended up going into a fellowship.
Thank you. Howard, why did you decide to leave us?
So much like what Isaac said, I think it had to do with, for me, my career goals. From the start, I kind of knew that I was more interested in the research rather than the patient interaction type of stuff. And I think going through P1 year, that really solidified that for me with all our different, experiences with patient care. And so I guess going back to the whole research thing, part of my end goal is to either be in academia or industry, kind of doing research. And so I knew that having a PhD would kind of open more doors and opportunities for me. And so then the question is like, why didn't I just do a PhD? Why do I have the PharmD part? And I think that for me personally, I feel like studying drugs and pharmaceutics, it makes more sense to have that sort of clinical background as well. And so again, it's kind of like opening more doors and opportunities for myself. And I wouldn't be pigeonholing myself into particularly like just like one aspect of industry or something like that. So yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you. And Josh, welcome to the class of 2022.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Monica. This is a super interesting return to pharmacy school for me. I did my research in Victor Nazee's lab, so he's actually my thesis advisor, and my pathway is a little bit interesting. I kind of had a little bit of a very fortunate situation where I was able to take a 2-year leave of absence and work in industry. And for the first year was a part of a project that actually came out of Victor's lab. So this was an idea that we worked on the bench at UCSD right in BRF2, and we got very fortunate to be able to take it into the private equity space. And then I sort of moved from there into a public sector called Phoenix Biopharmaceuticals. And working there was just a completely cool experience. Just being able to, just take on all the responsibilities that you sort of learn and that you really do learn in the BMS program, Howard. So it's actually a really cool transition to see these skill sets be applied out in industry. And my return to pharmacy school is really, really fortunate because now I'm able to sort of sink deeper into the curriculum and be able to pull things out of it to try and apply what I'm learning back into research. I'm kind of hoping to pursue the academic route, performing research in an academic setting. I tend to be a little bit happier with doing research in an academic setting as opposed to an industry setting, but I love both avenues, and so this is just sort of an opportunity for me to really give it my best shot into academics, and so that's why I'm here.
Thanks, Josh. I mean, a quick thing, Josh. I met Josh the first day. When was it? Rady Children's.
We're at Rady Children's.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you. We do have a question regarding requirements for the PharmD PhD program. Were there any specific requirements that you guys had to fulfill in order to take on the dual degree?
Yeah, Howard, did you want to, or I could, it
Yeah,
might be
I
different
can,
now.
yeah,
I don't know what. Yeah,
I can start off with it because recently this summer I sat with our the director of student affairs, Jenna Bastier, to really kind of like set the rules of like, okay, like what actually needs to be done, because so far it has kind of been different throughout the years and unclear. So I don't think there's really anything extra that you have to do. The way the program is set up is that any pharmacy student, P1 or P2, is eligible to enter the PharmD PhD program. What the only extra thing you have to do is get lab rotations in order before the end of your P2 year, because that's kind of what sets you up to join a lab right after your second year of pharmacy school. But in terms of like prerequisite classes or any additional exams such as the GRE, none of that was required for me at this time. So yeah, I think it's really kind of just like your own mentality and being sure that's something you want to pursue. And speaking to the right people such as Jenna or other people in the School of Pharmacy to make sure that you're on track for that. And Josh, if you'd like to add.
Yeah, just to add on top of that, and when you do enter the BMS program, we do have to take, we have to fulfill certain course credits. We take certain grad student seminars and be a part of journal clubs. And so we really do sink into the grad student program with their curriculum as much as we do with the pharmacy school curriculum.
Thank you so much. We got a question in the comment section. It says, how do students balance the PharmD and PhD degree at the same time?
Sorry, can you repeat that, Monica?
The question is about balancing the PharmD and PhD degree at the same time. How are you guys managing that?
I could speak on that. It's, for me personally, it's actually pretty difficult, to be as open as possible. And I think this was something, I don't know, Howard, if I had to sort of go back and get things set up again, I had a tough time choosing to go straight down the science route without leaving behind sort of the clinical discussions that I'm so used to having while we're in pharmacy school. And I kind of opted for that. So I just sunk my teeth straight into science. And for a while in the back of my head, I'm like, well, there's the pharmacy curriculum. And it was actually pretty tough for me to pull things out, but my project was actually very much geared towards clinical impact. And so that really helped me, pull things out of sort of the pharmacy lizard brain that I might have and incorporate that into the research. But now coming back into the PharmD curriculum, it's almost like this weird, not weird, but interesting flip that I have to do, where now the predominant effort is now focused in on the clinical mindset as opposed to the research mindset. And so, but I got to keep both minds going because I don't want to lose touch on those things. So for me, it is a little bit difficult, but I'd imagine that it would only get harder from here. So I think I'd have to keep working on it.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up because I think I faced a similar thing, like having been in pharmacy school for 2 years and just learning so much about clinical aspect of pharmacy, and then jumping into the BMS program and having classes with students who dedicated like their entire undergrad in the last few years in pure research. It's a totally different conversation to have. And it was intimidating because, everyone in the BMS program kind of comes from a different background and has so much knowledge about different aspects of biomedical sciences. And I kind of came in with not as much, and I was just, having focused on clinical stuff a lot. It was almost kind of scary for me, but yeah, you're right. It's kind of that weird mentality switch that was a little hard to balance with. But I think once you kind of get into the rhythm of it, then things smoothen out, and you just kind of have to go with it. But I also will add, I guess, based off the question, a different topic. I feel like the way the PharmD PhD is structured, it's kind of like a sandwich where you're in the pharmacy school, then you pause and you do your PhD and you come back. So none of it kind of overlaps really. Like you're not trying to juggle a PhD while you're doing a PharmD. So in that aspect, there's not some sort of like overlapping extra work that I'm having to like accommodate into my life. I just wanted to point that out in case that's kind of the idea of that question.
Thanks so much, Howard. I really appreciate it. And Josh, of course. I have a question here for residency. Are you ready for it? Yeah? All right. It says, what exactly is a pharmacy fellowship and how is a fellowship different from a residency?
Yeah, I'll take that. So fellowship is a different training program, a post-degree training program than residency. There's really two different types of fellowships out there. There's academic fellowships and pharma fellowships. Most of the pharma fellowships are with an academic institution. Rutgers has a bunch of them. UCSD has, I think, one or two right now. One with Pfizer. That's a really good one. And so, yeah, what fellowship does is prepares you for a non-clinical job where you are a specialist in something, whether that's economics, commercial side, clinical pharmacology, what I do, which I can talk about. But really, it's getting you into a very niche skill set that you're not going to come out of with a PharmD. And it's not about your clinical training. It's about taking your clinical acumen and applying it to a different discipline. So fellowship can almost be thought of as like a career changer in a way out of a PharmD. Like if you go into marketing, there's a lot of people in marketing and pharma that do fellowships or in commercial, figuring out business strategy, and you inform those decisions from the PharmD that you bring with you. That's kind of how I think about it.
Thank you. We do have a question in the comments, and they ask, how did you decide to join your respective labs?
For me, it was mentorship. That was the biggest thing for me. I was looking for a strong mentor, and I got very happy and very lucky to have been accepted in Victor Nazee's lab. So he's my mentor and my thesis advisor. So that was the number one thing I looked for, was mentorship, and of course the lab atmosphere, and being able to join a lab that really spoke to what I believed in, with work ethic and just positivity, and just having a great time doing science. And those are the things I was looking for in a lab.
For me, I started first with focusing on the research area. So I was interested in kind of drug discovery development, and also aging and natural products. And so this lab that I'm currently in, it kind of has arms in all of those different areas. And then following that, having done my lab rotation there, I focused kind of on what Josh mentioned, like the mentorship and making sure that the lab suited me in terms of what I wanted to get out of them. And my advisor is super friendly, personable, and always available to speak with us and kind of tailor our learning experience to whatever we want. So that was really awesome.
Yeah, I guess for me, I'm in an academic fellowship, which is pretty unique in that you do choose your mentor, similar to a PhD program. Most fellowships, you'll have like a primary fellowship director, and then you'll have a bunch of mini mentors that you don't get to choose. But at UCSF, because it's more an academic PhD style program, I'm under the mentor Rada Savic. And the reason why I joined her lab is she's extremely strong in methodology for clinical pharmacology modeling and simulation. And I joined the lab really to come out on the other side with a lot of skills. One of the things I'll stress whenever joining a postgraduate training opportunity, whether it's with a mentor or a PhD mentor, a fellowship mentor, is where do their grads go? How successful are they? What jobs do they have? What skills make them sought after? These are questions you should be asking before you jump in the deep end.
Isaac, I have a question that kind of bounces off mainly the last question.
Sure.
Sorry to throw this in there, but so you mentioned there's an academic fellowship and an pharma fellowship. So can you talk about the differences between those two?
Yeah, so there's not a lot of academic fellowships out there anymore. UCSF is one of the biggest ones. We have about 4 or 5 fellows at a time in the clin pharm department alone. And so what an academic fellowship really does is it gets you up to speed in a field of research with a mentor. It's kind of like it gets you a few papers with a mentor so you can apply for a K grant, which is your bridge to getting an R01. And so the whole point of the fellowship is to prepare you to become faculty at UCSF, or at least make that a possibility, which is a really hard place to become faculty. So the academic fellowships really are a bridge to faculty. And if not that, they're a bridge to working at CDC, FDA, or in pharma. And so I hope I'm answering your question. So basically, it's a 2 to 3 year fellowship, and usually the third year is reserved if you're waiting for a grant. And then the pharma fellowships really are about getting a job at that company the day after. So learning some specific skill set that prepares you to be functional in a role. And kind of what we've seen is that people are really functional after even a year in a pharma fellowship. So I know USC is doing only a year program, and a lot of people are hired out by March or April, like me, out of fellowship because they're ready for industry before even finishing the 2 years. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks.
Sure.
Thank you. We got an additional question, and they asked, does the PhD route offer a greater opportunity for broader research than a fellowship which concentrates on a specific niche?
maybe I could speak on the PhD route. I don't have the experience in the fellowship route, but I think for the PhD route, and what's really cool is that you have a lot of influence as to where your project can go, and that's something that if you wanted to, you can take your project from from one theme to another theme if it means that the data is kind of taking you in that direction. And so sometimes we might start off with one hypothesis, and then over time we kind of end up with something that's very different. And so I think if I'm answering your question on project-wise and I guess what we learned, I'd say that you can take it more clinically if you'd like, and utilize some of those resources that we've learned, and to implement that into your research, and to definitely defend that. We'd have to say, these are the reasons why we like to use these techniques. These are the reasons why we like to ask these questions. And then you kind of have that discussion with the lab to see if this is the best foot forward for where your project should go. Yeah, it's definitely one of those situations where in the BMS program, if you find something that you learned, something very cool, that might be alternative angle to your project, and it's something that you discuss with your advisor and with your lab mates, and everyone says, hey, this is something very interesting that you should move forward with. It's definitely an opportunity to take. So it's not like you have one project and you're kind of stuck in one position. Really, we have our questions, and sometimes the data tells us something else, and we'd have to follow where those questions come up and where the answers lie. I hope I answered the question.
You did. Thank you so much. I actually have a new question here. Maybe Howard, you can start us with that. But how long does it take to earn your PhD or complete your fellowship, Dr. Cohen? And then that's it. That was the end. So 2 questions there.
Right. I mean, so with the PhD, it's unique in that it's not like a set amount of time, like you must complete this in X amount of years. It really depends on kind of the student and these research advisors, I guess, kind of their time management, and how, and science is so, you never know how science is going to go. So it really depends on kind of the, like, quote unquote success of your work, and kind of how things are managed in that way. I guess Josh can speak of how long he took and what his experiences are with members in his lab and what he's seen. But I'd say like typically 4 to 6 years. That's kind of what I've heard. Josh wants to add to that.
Yeah, I think I'd say in STEM around, on average now, it's about from last I remembered, it was about 5 years. But it also really, a lot of it is also dependent on the project and where the project takes you. Sometimes you might want to take extra years to really flesh out the project more because you're super interested in it. Sometimes you might get very fortunate and the project is there, and you already just kind of finish it in a very short manner. So I think a lot of it is where the project kind of takes you. The series of questions you ask is kind of where it might guide you down those paths. And either path is actually just as fulfilling, I think, because if you could spend more time to research the thing that you really have a genuine question about, it's I think for me, I would do it every year. So
yeah, I can talk a little bit about fellowship. I'd say most fellowships are 2 years flat, and there's very little room to stay longer. If anything, people try to finish earlier and get a job earlier. Some fellowships are 1 year now, which I think makes a lot of sense. Seattle Genetics and USC both moved to 1 year, or maybe have always been. UCSF is kind of the exception because we are more academic. You can stay on for a 3rd year if your research program demands it, or you just want more skills, or you're waiting on a grant. But I'd say fellowship, it's a very short 2 years, and you have to, unlike a PhD program, there's no room to kind of dilly-dally. You need to like have a good project day one and like really be working on it day one. Otherwise, you're not going to have produced anything in 2 years. And so in that respect, for an academic fellowship, it's really short. For the pharma fellowships, it's more like a residency in that you'll probably be doing a lot of rotations on different teams, different projects in the pharma. And it's not about some like longitudinal research project. It's really about learning your function, how your function works at a drug company.
Thank you.
Sure.
We did get some more questions. How are the students ranked for choosing residencies and or fellowships? And then Dr. Cohen, this is a little bit more specific, but what do you think made your application stand out, and what tips would you give?
Sure. So a few things I'll say. You don't need to do as much as I did. I came out of pharmacy school with 6 published papers, which a lot of PharmD PhDs will have less than that. I think normally they do. That being said, that was a big factor in me getting the fellowship, just proving I have research acumen. Most of the PharmDs at UCSF are, a lot of them that go into the fellowship are PharmD PhDs. And so the bar is very high. What did I do to prepare? I got as much experience in research as possible during pharmacy school. I also did an internship at a biotech company in La Jolla. I think that internship isn't recruiting anymore. It's called Human Longevity. I also did rotations in industry and at FDA. I think that's key, is getting one industry experience. I worked at Pfizer for 6 weeks and the FDA for 6 weeks as a P4. I wouldn't say anything is required to get a fellowship. There's no requirements. I'll say they're not going to care about your clinical skills, your grades. It doesn't really matter. What it really, to get a fellowship, you have to know about the position you're going into and prove that industry in the interview. Like, I understand this function and like what it takes to be successful in this function. And then the only way to be able to answer that question is to have done it a little. So really having a successful internship and being able to speak about that during the interview, I think is important. And the bar is really low for fellowship in terms of actual hard requirements on your CV. There's really just kind of like a little threshold, and then what differentiates you is really how you interface with these people. Pharma is very cross-functional, and so they really want people that can communicate with different types of scientists, different types of people, and basically be someone people want to work with. So there's soft skills as well that they're looking for that are hard to acquire during pharmacy school, that aren't like formally taught. And I think people from other schools do have an advantage over UCSD because we have such a small network of fellows compared to like Rutgers or USC, and they have all these role models, upperclassmen that get fellowships. I think Rutgers, 25% of the class gets a fellowship every year. And so I think one of the things I recommend is having a mentor who's a fellow or a past fellow who can kind of get you on the right track. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Sure.
Truly appreciate the response. I've got one last question, and it says, what should a pharmacy student consider when deciding whether or not a PhD or a fellowship is right for them? We can start with Josh.
Just your love for discovering the truth. I think if you really love that, you know, and you're willing to wake up every day to ask the hard questions about whatever it is that you're interested in and research, and to take it to the bench and to hands-on work on this, I would say go the PhD route. You know, I think that for me personally, there was nothing better than coming up with the question and then designing the experiment and then figuring out whether my question had there was some validity in what I was asking. That was what, you know, kept me going every year in the PhD route. And I would do it again every time because it was just so much fun for me to learn about it. Obviously there are tough days as with every thing that we're doing, but just to not be afraid to ask the hard questions and to really just sink deeply into what you're researching. And yeah, I can only speak on the PhD side because I don't have a fellowship, but that was my experience, and for me, I chose that reason, and maybe some people might resonate in the same manner, that if you just love asking questions about why something works, and you have you have the curiosity to go into the lab and to figure out why something works and to design the experiment to do so, I'd say go for the PhD. I'd say go for the PhD. But again, that's coming from a biased viewpoint. So thank you.
Thank you. Any last words, Howard?
Could you repeat the question again? Sorry, just want to make sure I heard it right.
Yeah, sure. What should a pharmacy student consider? No, never mind. That's not the one. It was about, well, yeah, it is. Was it? Sahar, I lost the question.
It sounded
What should
like
a pharmacy student consider when deciding whether or not a PhD or fellowship is right for them? So for you, it'd be PhD. Why did you?
right.
What do you think?
I guess I'll take a more practical approach to this question. I think something that a pharmacy student should consider definitely is the opportunity cost of spending an extra like 5 years on research as opposed to graduating with a PharmD and going straight into work. Because like Josh said, it is really fulfilling if someone is research oriented and it has the passion to pursue that. However, there you are spending an extra 5 years as a student without a pharmacist, like potential pharmacist salary. And so that's obviously not practical for a lot of people who are trying to do this to make a living. So I think that's definitely something to consider when you're deciding what type of route you want to go. And yeah, again, that's a really practical thing, but it's still important, because in the end, this is like a career choice, and 5 years is it's not measly. So
Yeah, no, definitely. I think Howard, I would totally agree, just to keep in mind the practicalities of what you're doing and to just not lose sight of where and how you're going to be applying, the research that you're doing into your career. And that kind of folds into the mentorship that you have, the relationships that you have with your colleagues and where that could take you. But yeah, so definitely take into considerations the practicalities. I definitely had a very interesting time trying to organize those thoughts, but at the end of the day, it was the day-to-day going into the lab and asking questions that just kept me going, regardless of the practicalities. But it was that kept me going. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a great discussion. I mean, I know it's 4:31. I promised under 30 minutes, so I'm sorry. If you guys are okay with it, we can take another question if that's okay. I think Sahar, we got another question, correct?
Sure.
Yes, so we have one additional question, and please feel free to send us any questions through messages. We'll be sure to get them out to Dr. Cohen, Dr. Sun, and Howard if you guys still have additional questions. But our last question is, are there any positions within the pharmaceutical industry outside of R&D where you see a PharmD PhD being an advantage, especially with more complicated therapeutic companies forming in the areas such as cell therapy, gene therapy, etc.? So I know that's a pretty big question, but if you guys can touch on that very briefly before we put our closing statements.
Yeah, what I can tell you is that there's very few positions in pharma that you currently need a PharmD PhD above a PharmD plus a fellowship. Very few. The only positions that would happen are positions that are predominantly PhD heavy, like translational drug discovery, things that a PharmD just wouldn't do without a PhD. Anything else that's in the milieu of like the gray area, PharmDs can get into pretty much with a fellowship. And I'd say there's a lot of fellowships where you don't have to have any research interest whatsoever to be successful. Commercial, medical science liaison, just to name a few, advertising and promotion. So there are a lot of areas where actually your PhD won't help you at all. And so what that means is that there's some other career that you're kind of in the continuum with, whether it's a marketing person, like an MBA, someone like that. That being said, there are departments where PhDs are an advantage. I think some of them are the more research heavy departments like health economics, clinical pharmacology. But again, you can get those skills in an MPH or a fellowship alone as well. So I don't think not having a PhD, at least currently in the current job market, holds you back at all. That being said, if you have a PharmD PhD and you come out with a lot of skills, you can probably get a job in industry without a fellowship. It's pretty common though for PharmD PhDs to need to do a fellowship even after to bridge the gap, because they come out so niche that they don't have like a specific role in pharma for them to fill. And so that's why some people, and this is why I took my career path. I could have done the PharmD PhD at UCSD, but I realized that I was just going to get the same skills I would get out of fellowship, and it would just take an extra year or two at least, and I would end up with the same job after. And really, in pharma, they mostly care, like your year's experience only count on your first day of the job. So if you come in with 5 years of PhD on top of your fellowship, you still come in with 0 years of experience, according to a lot of companies. And so you're not going to move up any faster. I don't mean to disappoint you guys that just invested in the PhD, but that's just kind of the cold, harsh reality. And a lot of it also is that, like, you don't need to know everything. Like, I don't know everything, and I just got a job. I think people think that there's this big burden to know how everything works and all that. What it really is in pharma, there's a lot of specialized people that all have their niche, and it's really about being a communicator, being able to work with that team, bring your skills. And so you don't need to train forever to do that. Yeah,
Wow, thank
that's
you.
just my 2 cents. Yeah.
Thanks so much. I mean, we were having side of conversations, me and Sahar. We were like, we should have a part 2. What do you think,
Yes.
Sahar? This
Oh
is
my God, the
amazing.
questions are just coming in.
Yeah.
This has been
I
really
can
informative.
give a little bit of little input on the PharmD PhD and positions in industry, because I had just came back from a 2-year leave of absence in industry, and I was working as a scientist doing pharmacology work. And my latest stint was at Phoenix, and what we were able to find was that Phoenix ended up being sort of acquired by another company, and it was really cool to see a company go from an R&D phase and then transition into the clinical phase, and the discussions that happened in the meetings, when these drugs do begin to transition into the clinic. So sometimes they would ask you questions about what exact experiments and assays have you guys developed to make sure that the drug that you are pushing into the clinic is relevant to what's already standard of care. And so those are questions that are asked, and they do open up your notebook, and they take a look at your protocols and the reagents that you've done, and they'll compare and contrast to see what has been done, what pathway has been done out there. If we're in the biopharmaceutical phase and we're developing biopharmaceuticals for a certain disease indication, what set of experiments have been done, pathways that went from the R&D phase into the clinic. And if we're working for a company that's competing in the same space, what are we going to do to improve upon that, or what can we do to make sure that we have the right comparisons that are made? And these are discussions that are they're really heavy discussions in these meetings to go from that transition. So there is a lot of room, to utilize the PhD, and it is tough to see, to kind of find if there's a specific position for a dual applicant. And I would have to say that there's, I think there's a very higher likelihood that there isn't ever a single position that we might find ourselves in, and we might find ourselves moving on into different areas, and having both degrees kind of gives you that leeway of should I push my career more down the discovery route or more down the clinical route? And both routes are pretty cool to be down, to be working in. So
Thank you so much, Josh. I'd love for you guys to stay longer, but unfortunately we have to end it. Sahara, I know you have an announcement before we call it a day.
Yes. Well, I want to thank all of you for being here today. It was a really excellent conversations. And plus we are getting more questions. So please stay tuned. We will probably have a part 2 because the information you guys are sharing are, the questions that we get all the time. How do we prepare ourselves after pharmacy school? What do we look for when we're in school to, pursue our goals and dreams? So thank you so much for your questions. And we've been asked many times if this is going to be recorded. Yes, it will be on our Facebook page. If you don't have a Facebook, you can find this on our YouTube channel. Please be on the lookout for that as well. Follow our different social media pages, because we do have so many updates for our live sessions. And again, if you don't have a Facebook, you can find this conversation on YouTube. So Thank you again for Dr. Cohen, Dr. Sun, Howard. Really great to see you guys. Thank you, Monica. And please stay tuned for our next presentations. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for having us.
Bye.
Thank you.